Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Michele Scarlet's True Health Podcast. Today we're speaking to holistic nutrition expert Nicole Dube. As the founder of Forging Health, Nicole discovered her passion for holistic health and nutrition through her own health challenges, and she's here today to tell us her story. Hi Nicole, how are you doing?
Hey, so happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Well, you have such an incredible story. I was looking through your notes and just our brief chat beforehand, and you have really overcome some amazing health obstacles. So before we dive into Forging Health and everything that you do to make people live in better bodies ultimately, can you tell us your story?
Sure. So it's a super long story, so I'll try to condense it down. But basically, about 10 years ago, I had gotten a vaccine and it triggered the first anaphylactic reaction that I'd ever had in my life. And so after that, over the course of the next few months, my body just started to break down in so many different ways. So first it started with cardiac symptoms. So I used to work out before work. I'd go for a run and I noticed that all of a sudden I would be getting these really crazy chest pains and short of breath. And it was really weird. And so I went to the doctor and I did some stress tests and I would always fail them. And so I was admitted to the hospital. I had an angiogram and they found that I had some degree of ischemia in my heart, meaning I was losing some oxygen, but they couldn't tell me why. So they just put me on some beta blockers and kind of sent me on my way, which I now know are not a great thing for people with mast cell conditions. And then, so they made me feel worse. And so I then started to become reactive to everything that I ingested, didn't matter what it was. It could have been foods that I've been eating forever, whatever I drank, supplements I've been taking for years, anything and everything. I would just start to have allergic reactions to everything. And I went to the ER, no joke, around 24, 25 times within this couple month period. I was there all the time having anaphylactic reactions. And so finally, I went to the ER one time and they were going to do some type of imaging of my brain. Like they were going to look at like my brain and my neck or something. And so they gave me contrast dye and I had an anaphylactic reaction to it, like in front of them. So I had the duck lips and I had all of that. And so when they saw it in real time, then they were like, oh, okay, like we need to figure this out, because they would usually just send me home and just tell you like, no, you're just stressed out. You know, I'm sure you've heard that too. A lot of times when you're a younger woman and you present with health issues, they tell you it's in your head or you're just stressed out or you just have anxiety.
Oh yeah, been there.
Yeah. And so they admitted me to the hospital at that point. And at the same time, I had developed the onset of POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So it's a form of dysautonomia. And so what would happen essentially is that my heart rate would jack up to like 160. So it felt like I was sprinting. The blood would pull my legs and I would faint a lot of the time.
Did these go hand in hand, your two diagnoses?
They do a lot of the time, not
Okay.
always, but it is common to see both of that.
Okay.
Because a lot of times with POTS, there's different types of it, but a lot of people have POTS and it's secondary to something else. So for me, it was secondary to the mast cell disorder that I had. And so when I addressed the mast cell disorder, the POTS subsided and kind of went away. So that's the case for a lot of people that I work with too. But yeah, they tend to go hand in hand. And so I was in the hospital for about a month. They did the $1 million workup on me. They had different theories along the way. They thought I had MS. They thought I had lupus. They found an adrenal mass. At one point, they thought that's the answer because they thought it was something called a pheocytochroma, which means it's releasing hormones and all that kind of stuff, but it wasn't. And so at the end of the day, I remember it was right before Christmas. They couldn't figure it out. So they're like, hey, you want to go home? And so they just discharged me and I wasn't any better. And so what infuriated me though was they discharged me with a diagnosis of anxiety. And I was enraged by that because it wasn't, I mean, not to say that you don't experience anxiety when you're going through these situations, because obviously you do, but that wasn't the primary issue. It was, you know, something I knew deep rooted was wrong in my body. And so this was around Christmas. I went to my parents' house for Christmas. I was super sick. And I just kept fainting. Like they would find me different places in the house. And I remember, I think it was like the day after Christmas, something like that. I fainted. They found me at the top of the stairs and I was really banged up because I had fallen. And they were just like, that's it. Like, we're getting in the car, and they drove me a couple hours to Boston, where there were a lot of different medical centers, some more high profile facilities. So they took me to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, which by chance happens to have one, I think it's the only mast cell center in the country at a hospital.
So
Yeah,
just
so
by luck.
just by luck, like it
Wow.
became that I ended up there. They admitted me there for about, I think, a week or so, and they diagnosed me eventually with mast cell activation syndrome. And so that's where the healing sort of started. But it's sort of a really crazy, slow process, because at that time I was anaphylactic all day, every day. I was down to 4 foods that I could eat without having anaphylaxis. I lost 90 pounds. So it was chicken. Everybody always wants to know that. So it was chicken, it was broccoli, it was apple, and it was sweet potato. And so I lost 90 pounds because I wasn't eating. And so
That's crazy.
and I was so weak. And so, yeah, and that was going on for the better part of a year, where I was in that state. And so I had to take a leave of absence from my job. I was totally disabled. I had to move in with family because I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't walk because I would faint. So it was really, I felt like an infant. And so I was basically bedridden for most of the time. And so that's how it started.
So you were diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome.
Yeah.
Which I do want to touch on a little bit more, but so you're diagnosed by ultimately a specialist. This is not just a family physician.
Yes.
And you were told that like there was no, like they couldn't do anything for you. You just were told to live that way.
Yeah. So what they essentially did was they give you a bunch of meds, and they told me specifically to learn to live with it and go on disability. And so when I heard that, I just, every cell in my body was like, challenge accepted, like, absolutely not. Like, I knew that wasn't, the answer for me, and that wasn't my path in life. And I would never accept that. But it's funny, like I hear, I've worked with a lot of clients over the years, and some of them are on disability, and some of them aren't able to work, and some, so it can be super challenging. But when they told me that, I just was like, nope, I'm going to find a different way. And so then I sort of dove into the research and the science, and like you, I'm inquisitive. I wanted to figure it out. And so I just did it on my own. Because back then, I mean, a lot of people are talking about mast cell conditions now. I noticed that a lot lately, but back 10 years ago, they were not. Like, there was nobody doing this work. You really couldn't find much out there. And so you really had to find your own way back then.
So, okay, I want to ask, is there a spectrum in terms of severity when it comes to mast cell activation? Because like yours sounded, I mean, to the point where you could only eat 4 foods without becoming anaphylactic. Like, is there somebody that wouldn't be necessarily to that extreme and wouldn't know that they have mast cell activation syndrome, or would they think it's just a histamine issue, allergies?
Absolutely. So there definitely is a continuum in terms of severity. So, I've met people with all kinds. And for me too, when I look back, I feel like I had this in the past and didn't know it because it just wasn't severe. But yeah, so there's definitely a continuum. There's 2 main categories of mast cell type conditions, and one's called mastocytosis. And so that's where your body makes too many mast cells. It just has a proliferation of them. And then the other type is called mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, and that's what I have. And so that's where you have a normal number of mast cells, but they're constantly they call it degranulating or releasing chemicals when they shouldn't. So you're always in an allergic state constantly. They're just never turn off. But to your point though, you can have varying levels of severity of it. So some people, aren't anaphylactic at all, never have been, maybe never will be. And maybe they just have some GI issues, or some people, they break out in hives, or some people have neuro issues. So it runs the gamut. Like, I've worked with people with all across the spectrum. Some it's not that bad, and others it's very, very extreme.
So when somebody comes to you with symptoms, I don't know exactly how you promote yourself, and we'll get into that, but if they come to you with, they're covered in hives, but they are not anaphylactic, they do not have a diagnosis of MCAS, are you somebody who just then works on them as a whole? Do you require them to have the diagnosis? Like, how is it that you sort of work mast cell activation syndrome into your practice?
Sure. So I don't require a diagnosis. A diagnosis can be hard to get for some people. Here's the thing though, and I saw a practitioner post about this recently, making the case that, you really don't need a diagnosis. All it is a medical label, you can approach it holistically, et cetera. I agree with that to an extent, but I do believe if you have it or you really suspect you have it in a more moderate or severe way, I would encourage you to get a diagnosis. Here's why. Because if you have to use the traditional medical system at some point, which you probably will at some point in your life, they will not take you seriously unless you have a diagnosis, right? So if you have, a lot of sensitivities to things, to medications, to foods when you're in a hospital, they will not listen to you unless you have a diagnosis. So for example, I had a surgery about a year ago. It wasn't related to mast cell at all, but because I had that diagnosis, my doctors met with my mast cell specialist. We came up with a care plan. We chose meds that were less likely to cause me to have a reaction. We had this whole plan in place that allowed me to go through that whole process and not have any issues at all. So I do think you should. But having said all of that, in terms of people who come to me to work with me, no, you don't need to have a diagnosis. And we start to approach it holistically. We take a look at what's going on, what the puzzle pieces are specifically for that, right? And so it could be a whole host of things. And from the work that you do as well, like it's not just one thing. We were talking about this before, all the systems are connected, right? And so you just got to figure out. So we might look at your neurological system, your hormone system, your immune system, your digestive system. So it just depends on the person and what their story is in terms of where I start and how we focus and where we sort of investigate more.
Interesting. So would you say that mast cell, even POTS, for instance, would be very similar in terms of autoimmunity? So it's not something that you're necessarily going to cure. Or, maybe you subscribe to that. I don't know. This is what I'm asking. It's not, is it something that you can cure, or is it something that you put into remission, or is it something that you keep under control based on natural approaches, holistic herbs, supplements, diet, lifestyle, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that it is similar to autoimmunity in that you can't cure it, but you can manage it or sort of bring it back under control to the point where it doesn't rule your life all day, every day. So yeah, so I would say it's similar in that to autoimmune conditions.
Yeah, that's incredible. Ultimately that would mean the difference between somebody like you, if you didn't pursue healing naturally and just going on disability, being on a ton of medication, and living with family the rest of your life because you can't take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And obviously living and thriving, and
absolutely, you can contribute to the world and have a full life and a normal life. And that's what I always try to convey to the people that I work with, because some of them come to me in that similar state, right, where they're not working, their family thinks they're nuts, that they're making it up, they can't hold down a job, they're losing money, and they feel horrible, and they don't get to do the things they wanted. They can't eat out in a restaurant, or they don't, they can't do the things that used to make them happy. And so I always try to instill that you can get to that place. It just takes time and some investigating and some work. So,
yeah, absolutely. That's great advice anyway. Like,
you're with anything.
I specialize in gut and hormone health, typically in women, and that can be a long journey as well. And it does take some investigating, and it does take some effort and commitment, and it can take some money, unfortunately. And it is an investment in your health. But I always try to reassure people that if they stay the course, it is so well worth it. When I think about when I was in the thick of my issues versus where I am today, like the word free just comes to mind. Like I just like finally feel free from this like this prison that was my body at one time. I can relate, not to such an extreme level, but I can relate to doctors dismissing me. I can relate to having anxiety over food, and I can relate to feeling like I just wasn't going to eat anything if I was going out 2 days from now, because I was terrified of what the reaction was going to be inside of my body. And then ultimately having those thoughts create a whole nother cascade effect of stress and all kinds of stuff. So I can
Yeah.
absolutely relate in that way, and just reminding people that the investment that they're making into their health now is so short term compared to what they could have afterward.
Oh, for sure. And it's such a great point too, that it takes time, especially with mast cell disorders. It's not like you do this for 2 months and you're, great. It can take a couple of years to really get to a good point. But if you do that, your life can really, really propel forward and feel normal again. It just takes that time and effort. And it takes to addressing all of it, not just the physical, like you were saying. Your mindset matters, your emotional health matters, your spiritual health matters. If those things are out of balance, then the physical can't really take root. So you have to be willing to look at all of it and do that work.
You felt with every fiber of your being that you like didn't want to go down the path of being on meds and being on disability, etc. Do you think that your mindset, I know that you said spiritual issues, emotional issues, etc. Do you think working on those things were a massive turning point in your health?
Absolutely, 1,000%, 1,000%. And yeah, I mean, I had to take, and you and I were talking about this before, like, you have to take a look at your life, right? Like, what was the environment within which you are living and being that created an environment for you to get sick in the first place? And it's not just what you're eating or what you're doing. It's, do you have work-life balance? Do you have healthy, supportive relationships in your life? Do you have unresolved traumas that you haven't dealt with? The answer was yes to all of those things, so I had to look at all of that stuff. It's not just, okay, let me eat a low histamine diet and I'll take some, meds. And it's not. You have to look at all of your life and look at all the different ways that contribute to health or to illness.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I have a saying, and I'm sure you've seen it. I relate to it every time I see it on Instagram, but basically, like, you cannot heal in the place you got sick in.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to. And sometimes that's the hardest part, right? Because we have to take a real hard, honest look at our lives, how we're living, who we associate with, who we allow in our energy and in our space. And sometimes that you have to make really hard choices
Yeah.
about how you're living. And it's not easy. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm a testament to, I had said to you earlier, I am a recovering people pleaser.
Yes.
Opening my own business, I was 22 years old and just dove right in. I was doing it for 12 years and I would bend over backward for everybody at all times. I worked 7 days a week. It was whether it was my clients
Yes.
or my staff. I just gave everything I possibly could to everybody. And then it never seemed to be enough. And I always make the connection that your ability to say no or your ability to make boundaries is like a muscle, or the opposite, or it's like
Yes.
a deteriorating muscle. If you are constantly saying yes to everybody all the time and neglecting yourself emotionally, that
Yep.
muscle is going to deteriorate. But the second you start saying, nope, that's not for me. Nope, hang on a second, take a step back. Nope, I'm not doing that. And you start really listening to your emotional self, that muscle gets bigger.
Yeah.
And
And
it's a
not
lot
feeling
easier.
bad about it. And
Yes.
not feeling bad about it either, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm like you, type A, people pleaser. What is it, what does everybody else need? And it's to your own detriment. And sometimes it takes an extreme situation like an illness to force you to look at that stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I would definitely say that my emotional journey was 50% of my healing.
I believe that. I have no doubt about that. It's so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked a lot about MCAS, or mast cell activation syndrome. Let's talk about POTS, because this is also one that you specialize in, and I'm really just curious. This is one I don't have a ton of personal experience with, and would just love to know a little bit more, and I'm sure our listeners would too.
POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And so it's a form of dysautonomia. And there's sort of a continuum of types of it, just like there is with mast cell activation syndrome. And so essentially what it causes is your heart rate to really go really, really high. And a lot of times it causes in some people, your blood pressure will drop, but a lot of times your blood pools in your legs. And it can cause all kinds of symptoms. Some people faint. A lot of times you get neurological symptoms, you get anxiety, you have trouble walking, you can't exercise. So a lot of times people with this condition, you can't really stand up and exercise at all. So a lot of times they'll recommend recumbent exercise. So things where you know, like a recumbent bike or something where you're on the ground doing like chair yoga or something like that. So it's a very debilitating condition. Like I said earlier, a lot of times it's secondary to something else. And so you kind of just have to figure out what that something else is and address that. And then the POTS symptoms tend to subside in those cases.
Okay.
But it can be very debilitating for people.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very debilitating. It also sounds hard to diagnose. Like,
Yeah, so how they diagnose,
doctor, you know?
well, you know, actually, what they typically do is something called the tilt table test. So essentially they strap you to a table and they flip the table, invert you, and sort of see how, and then they take your measurements, you know, they see how your heart rate responds and how you respond. But generally what they do though, and something that you can do at home, is they just take your heart rate when you're lying down, when you're sitting up, and when you stand up, and they look to see how much it increases between those sort of postures. But generally, if it increases more than 30 beats, they'll diagnose you with POTS. So, yeah.
And so
for me, I didn't have a tilt table test. They just did it in the hospital based on, they'd have me sit up, they'd have me stand up, they'd look at the heart rate jack up, you know, and the symptoms that I was having, and I was faint. So they diagnosed me that way.
So what would have been, if you decided to go the medical route, what would have been the treatment for POTS?
So they use certain types of medications. One of them is called Florinef. They have you do things where compression stockings, which I did for a period of time, which they try to push that, you know, blood back up, you know, your leg. And then they'll have you like oversalt your food to get your blood pressure up, to help your blood vessels constrict, to like get you. Yeah. So I remember doing that in the beginning. I was putting salt on everything. And so, yeah, and staying hydrated. Sometimes people will use electrolytes and drinks that can be really helpful. Yeah, so it tends to be medication, compression stockings, salting your food, and using electrolytes is what what people will do.
Interesting, because you know, anytime we talk about a holistic treatment, it doesn't matter what it is. If you and I, from our background, if we're looking at the body as one system, right? Everything affects everything else. And if you think about what you're just talking about, MCAS and POTS, both of them have something to do with, if they have things to do with each other, then it has to do with their hormone system, their neurological system, their digestive system, etc. And then you give these people pharmaceuticals or food they can't technically digest very well because it's the only thing that doesn't trigger them, and then their systems become even more deteriorated.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically about symptom management, which, you know, like all of these things I have never found a person who's been able to heal from these two things solely from medications, right? It might be what you need initially, and that's perfectly okay, you know, to stabilize yourself. But I've never seen a person be able to do that deeper healing work to really get underneath what's causing that dysfunction, unless, you know, you step away from that and sort of pursue a more functional medicine type approach to it.
Amazing. I mean, I'm so happy that you are thriving in life right now and like overcoming all of that, because I think that there would be a huge number of people that would feel so defeated if their doctor, specialist, etc., gave them no news of getting better and just like telling them this is it.
Yeah.
You know, that would be a very defeating feeling, I imagine.
It is. And I feel like sometimes too, we give away too much power to providers, and it's not to diminish there's so many amazing providers out there, and their education, their training is something that deserves respect, right? Absolutely. But I feel like sometimes we give too much of our power away, and we just say, all right, well, you're the doctor, so what you say goes. And we don't advocate for ourselves. We don't question what we're told. We don't look for alternatives and see if this is really the right path for ourselves. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The advocating for yourself. Oh my gosh, it's the biggest thing I tell people,
You have to.
well,
You
I'll tell
have
you
to.
just a quick story about part of my journey. It's got to be 12 years ago now. I had breast implants put in, and they were fantastic, and I loved them for 10 years. And this was part of my journey, was getting them out, because I realized how much inflammation they were causing me, and my immune system was constantly activated, therefore, hitting every aspect of my body. And when I went to my doctor, she was like, no, it's impossible. It's impossible. That would never happen. And I was like, not convinced. That year that I saw her, I probably left her office 5 times in tears, because she just wouldn't listen to me. And at the time, that was the only way I could, like I said, I'm in Toronto. It was the only way I could see having my explant surgery covered by health insurance, right? Covered by our universal health insurance. And ultimately, she refused to say it was causing any issues. So I had to pay out of pocket anyway. I went forward, got the explant, did some healing, did a lot of detoxing, etc. 3 or 4 months later, literally every marker came down, every marker. And I went to my doctor, and to your point, like they're trained the way they're trained. I'm not finding them at all. This is just my experience with my doctor. I went to her, I told her everything. She did all my blood work. She was amazed at where my blood work had come. And I told her what I did. And she just looked at me and she goes, well, it was a foreign object in your body, and that might have caused a systemic reaction. And I just looked at her like, I told you this 6 months ago. But anyway, you have to advocate for yourself, like, to hear everything is normal or we can't do anything more, you just have to live with it. I don't think that there's a condition out there that anybody just has to live with.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I went to my I had a cardiologist back then, because I was having all these heart issues around that time. And I ran into him, I don't know, maybe like 5 years later or so. And he said to me, I always remember you, Nicole, because you taught me the biggest lesson, which was to listen to your patients, because I didn't believe you when you first came in. I just thought you were young and you were stressed out, and I didn't take you seriously. But then afterwards, I had this whole evolution of things that went on. And he said, I just always remember you, and I thank you so much, because I was kind of arrogant about it, and I didn't really consider what you were telling me, and you know your body better than anybody. And so thank you. And I was like blown away that he had said that. But yeah,
that's amazing. That's amazing. Oh, that's really, really nice and validating for you.
Yes, exactly.
So
yeah, absolutely.
That's great. All right, so let's move on to Forging Health, which is your clinic, which is your practice.
Yep.
You've been doing it now for 9 years.
Yeah, so, almost 10. Yeah.
Amazing. That's a huge milestone. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your practice, and specifically who you work with and how you help them?
Sure. So I work primarily with people with mast cell disorders and those types of things. Not just that, but the majority of people I do. I also work with autoimmunity, gut and hormone health. But predominantly people who reach out to me are people who have mast cell activation syndrome. And so I use a functional medicine approach. I'm a holistic nutritionist. And so we approach each person individually. We use functional lab testing along with diet, lifestyle, from the work you do, just a really comprehensive, holistic approach to each person. And each person is different. So the screenings that we may run will be different depending on the person and what their situation is. But I work with people to come up with a diet and lifestyle program that can be the most supportive for them as they work to address those health issues that they're dealing with.
And so what do you think about stress when it comes to mast cell and POTS?
So it's just in general, I would say, even beyond mast cell and POTS, it's, I think, one of the biggest contributors to health conditions across the board, period. I mean, I bet you would agree with that too, right?
I do agree. That's exactly why I asked.
Yeah, I mean, so with specifically to mast cell activation or POTS, so one of the biggest things you can do for yourself is manage your stress. And the reason why is when you're under chronic stress, whether it's physical stress, it's emotional stress, whatever it is, there's a part of your brain called the hypothalamus it releases something called corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH. And so that signals your adrenals to make cortisol. And so CRH actually activates your mast cells, and chronic stress keeps reactivating them. So over time, you know, from what the work you do, when your stress becomes chronic, your cortisol levels can burn out and deplete. That increases your inflammation. So then it just becomes this cycle. It causes you to constantly have mast cell reactions when you're running high stress. And you also know too, when you're in that state of sympathetic dominance, right? When you're in that sympathetic stress response, even if it's a low grade chronic stress response, there's no room for healing in that. You have to switch your body into that parasympathetic rest, digest, heal state. And you can't do that when you're stressed out all the time. So managing stress is the main number one thing you can do.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think that people get caught up in external stress.
Yes.
And you know, they can say, oh, I went on vacation last month, or I take a bath every night, or all these things, but they really are not understanding that there's a lot. I would say the harder one to manage is your internal stress.
Yeah.
Right? It's hidden. We know it's hidden, whether that's
Yeah.
bacteria overgrowth in their gut, whether that's food sensitivities, whether that's like breast implants or some sort of implant, things that are sort of festering on the inside that you don't know about.
Yes.
Or you don't address.
Exactly.
Sleep is a big one too.
Sleep is huge. You have to have good sleep hygiene. You have to get regular sleep. You can't heal if you're not. You can't. So.
Yeah. So,
and that's why I was just going to say, I think that's why the lab screenings too are so helpful, because to your point, a lot of times we have those internal hidden stressors and we don't know it, right? I remember running a gut panel on myself once thinking, no, I'm good. This is going to be fine. And all these things popped up that I didn't realize. And so that's why using those screenings can be so helpful in uncovering those things that you may not even know are out of balance for you.
Yeah, I would say that majority of the women that I run a GI map screening on, and we really take a look, like we really deep dive into the results of it. They had no idea how off things were. Like, you know, and I try to remind people specifically with gut that gut issues, or like the test results of gut issues, don't always manifest in digestive issues.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like the brain fog that people are in because of what's going on inside their body. Like, how are people living that way?
Yeah. And also your gut microbiome, that balance is so key, especially like, for example, with histamine intolerance. So when people have histamine intolerance, they generally can't break down, they don't make enough of that enzyme DAO, or diamine oxidase, that breaks down dietary histamine in your gut. And so people tend to focus on, oh, I just need to eat low histamine. But there are also several types of bacteria in your gut that overproduce histamine. And so if you have an imbalance of that gut microbiome, that could also be contributing. So you have to pay attention to all of that stuff. And we don't think about that sometimes. So
yeah. So if I came to you and we knew I had a diagnosis of MCAS, and you needed a holistic practitioner to work with me because I didn't want to go the route of medication, what might a program look like for me?
Well, it would be diet. So we take a deep dive into your diet, see how you're eating and any adjustments that we can make there. So I typically will start low histamine with people. However, I think a mistake practitioners make a lot is they just assume that's it, like just eat low histamine and you're fine. But with mast cell issues, you know, your mast cells release lots of chemicals, not just histamine. So that's usually not going to be enough. Or some people I've worked with MCAS don't have a problem with histamine. They have a problem with the other chemicals that their mast cells are releasing. So that can be the first step. Sometimes we do food sensitivity testing. Sometimes I have them keep food logs, so I can do a deep dive and look at what they're eating, their macronutrient ratios, the blood sugar balance that they have going on. So I'll look at that to see. Also, maybe they have a salicylate issue, maybe they have an oxalate issue, maybe they have a lectin issue. So we take a look at their diet and sort of do a deep dive in there and see what makes the most sense for them. And then we will look for mast cell stabilizers that work for them. And so Sometimes people are on the mast cell medications and sometimes they're not. So if they're not, or even if they are, we might experiment with some natural versions of mast cell stabilizers and antihistamines to see if any of them work for them. Because if they can find a natural version that, you know, really works well for them, then they can wean off the meds in some cases, or just go the natural route entirely. So that can be helpful as well. So I work with people, depending on their level of sensitivity, with trying to onboard some type of natural mast cell stabilizer. Then I will run screenings on people, like we were just talking about, to see, based on their story, what makes sense. A lot of people have mold that come to me underneath the mast cells, so that's a huge issue. Lyme, sort of gut dysbiosis, SIBO, that type of a thing. So we'll run maybe a gut panel. Hormones are a big piece with mast cell disorders because of the relationship between histamine, estrogen, progesterone. So we'll basically run some screenings, see what's out of balance for them specifically, and then we'll design protocols around that. Another thing that I do with pretty much everyone is neuroplasticity training, so nervous system regulation. So there are limbic retraining programs like the Gupta program or the DNRS program. And so they help you to sort of retrain your limbic system so that it's not in that fight or flight state all the time anymore. I'll do vagus nerve training with people as well, which your vagus nerve runs from your brain to your heart to your gut. And so if we can tone and strengthen your vagus nerve, that can act as an anti-inflammatory, that can help switch you into that parasympathetic stress response. So we'll do that. There's lots of different ways that you can go about that. So I'll use things like alternate nostril breathing, gagging, gargling, singing in the shower. Brain Tap is a great app that helps you with your vagus nerve signaling. So we'll do some type of brain retraining and vagus nerve retraining program. And then we'll just work on lifestyles. So figuring out what your triggers are. Some people react to temperature changes, so extreme heat or cold. Some people react to exercise. Some people react to chemicals. So whatever it is for them, we kind of figure out and come up with a plan of how to minimize that external stressors that they're under, and clean up their environment, the products that they use, you know, cleaning products, personal care products, all of that kind of stuff. We do a deep dive into that. And then addressing the emotional and the spiritual piece too, sort of what's going on with your mindset? Do you have negative beliefs underneath all of these things that are contributing to your health? And so doing that deeper work, or referring them to people that can help them with that work as well. So it's a little bit of everything.
That's incredible. And from my own experience, incredibly helpful for people. And, you know, looking at every piece of that puzzle is really what's going to get them to true health, not, you know, just covering up symptoms ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, so I got one more question for you.
Sure.
If you could describe how you feel in one word today versus how you felt in the thick of your health crisis, how would you describe it?
Grateful.
Grateful.
Grateful. Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, because, you know, and it's funny, it's not to say that I don't have bad days or I have flares, because I do. But when I do, and sometimes if I get in a flare, I get pissed. Like my first thought is, are we back here again? But then I think about, okay, but remember where you started from. And now if I get into a flare, it's not as bad. I know how to get out of it. I have the tools and the resources and the ability to do that. So I have automatically shifted to that state of being grateful, because there was a time when I thought, I'm never going to work again. I'm never going to walk again. I remember when I love to hike. And I remember once when I first went out and was able to go on a walk, I cried because I was so happy, because I thought I was never going to be able to do it again. So that's for me what I feel. I just feel grateful. I'm grateful for where I am now. I'm grateful for the struggle I went through, because it taught me so much, as I'm sure it did you as well. And it helps me be a more effective and empathetic clinician working with people one-on-one. So I'm just grateful for all of it.
Oh, that makes me really happy to hear that. Like, you can tell in your voice that that's truly how you feel. And I really appreciate you telling us your story. Thank you so much for chatting with me today and giving us such valuable insight into the importance of using food as medicine in a holistic approach to heal the body. is there a place you can leave our listeners with where they can find you? You know, I know you said your Instagram was hacked. Let's build her Instagram up, guys. Let's get her back.
Help me, somebody hacked my Instagram. So I had to start a new page. It's at Forging Health ND, my initials, N as in Nancy, D as in dog. And same thing on Facebook. And then my website is forginghealth.com.
Perfect. Thank you. I will make sure that those are in the show notes, and I will also make sure that everything that we promote here today gets to your page so we can help build that back up for you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so sweet.
No problem. Thanks for coming on today. We will talk to you soon.